Good morning. The subject right now is contract relations and material falsehoods. Right now, Chicago Reader has an article online. Now, I just want to let you know, I read the Chicago Reader for years. I found it to have some very quality journalism. It also had some other things that got me in a little trouble. But that was part of the Reader. It had more than one section. It was provided without cost to the reader, and was known to have some people that had worked there for a substantial amount of time. As a matter of fact, there is right now what I'm looking at an article, Streetwise in Trouble. It says it's dated for April 14, 2009, and written by a man named Michael Miner. I remember Michael Miner from when I used to be managing editor and then later editor of Streetwise newspaper. And in his column, he says something, at least as it's reflected right now online, that is materially false, which is, as it's put in here, Hanney's been the editor for 4 years. She wasn't around in 2001, and Oliver is long gone. That is not true. Suzanne Hanney was a senior reporter at Streetwise newspaper when I was hired as managing editor, and she continued working at Streetwise the entire time I was managing editor and then editor, and she was the only member of the original staff that stayed at Streetwise when the rest of us quit. Suzanne Hanney has been the most consistently employed person at Streetwise newspaper, so far as I know, since it started. So that she became the editor of Streetwise newspaper is a testament to her longevity and her commitment, but it's absolutely 100% false to allow the official public records to reflect that she was not there during the time frame when Streetwise was undergoing a serious imbroglio. As a matter of fact, I contacted Suzanne myself over the phone, and I went on site to the office in Chicago in 2016 in order for me to attempt to acquire copies of or actual original prints of works I had done when I was both editor as well as things that I had printed in the publication. I did receive 2 emails from her. Unfortunately, that record and those emails have been taken from me. But Suzanne remembered when we worked together. In those emails, it is reflected that she had cognizance that we worked together at the time, including the time that's discussed herein. What else about this? 2009 reconsideration of the situation regarding Streetwise newspaper is materially incorrect. In 2016, several of the members of the board of directors were the same as the members of the board of directors in 1998 through 2001. Now, I bring this up because there seems to have been a very serious problem somewhere, somehow, where the entire body of work I did as a journalist and newspaper editor at Streetwise was mischaracterized. That it's gone. None of the articles I wrote are accessible to me, and it seems to anybody else. And things that I wrote and published at the time ended up being taken out of the actual article I wrote, and excerpts appeared as contributions in other articles about topics that were somewhat similar but completely decontextualized. The ironic thing is, one of those specific articles was co-written between me and a United States military veteran who was also a journalist. And the recontextualization of that article has a very significant impact on things going on right now today. Why? Because that article was about a piece of legislation that had its 25th anniversary on 10 days after April 14th, except of 2021, and was authored by the person who is now President of the United States. He was not President of the United States at the time, and neither was the person running for a seat in the state government during newspaper coverage that publication provided prior to him becoming President of the United States. That is what would be considered to be public reportings on two presidents of the United States before they became President of the United States. There is a member of Congress that was on the board of directors at the time, and as far as I know, is still on the board of directors of that newspaper. Who else did you disappear in order to do what? You know, in some countries, in some communities, and in some political legacies, being a newspaper editor or a journalist is very provocative, but it's also very important. There are nations, including nations, that had coverage in Streetwise newspaper at the time I was the managing editor, including in connection with their relationship with street newspapers and how they assisted people in a transitioning national economic paradigm. There are people who used to be newspaper editors, who actually were founders of publications, who wrote provocative materials, including materials, by the way, that got them arrested. They ended up becoming the president. They became leadership in their own country. It was considered esteemable. It was considered respectable. If they said something and it turned out to not be accurate, or they changed their mind later, well, they wrote again. That's part of the history of political discourse. What does it mean to materially alter the public record about the actual history of an event, including an event regarding the legacy of a publication that apparently was important enough to have people disappeared altogether by virtue of what? Actually, I'm incorrect. We're not talking about 2 presidents. We're talking about 3. Because the specific topic here is real estate. And the fact that a mortgage apparently is not only about market participation, but also is about borrowing, right? So, who gets to broker media content, including media content providing coverage of political events in their political ascendancy? See, in some context, the authorship and the editing is also a part of somebody's political legacy. Do presidents write their own executive orders? Do senators and congresspeople write their own proposed pieces of legislation? Was it expected that somebody else who did their own authorship was supposed to accept subordination up to and including invisibilization so somebody else could claim their work products as part of their own, up to and including proposed pieces of legislation? If you were a newspaper journalist and or later a newspaper editor, and then later you propose pieces of legislation, and those pieces of legislation get passed into law, don't you think that people should know that the person who provided the newspaper coverage was also the person who later on proposed a piece of legislation that either got passed into law or they got selected as part of an appropriations process? See, if you were a competent newspaper editor covering matters related to, I don't know, the federal budget or the duties that had been fulfilled by members of public office that represented the constituencies that were the readership, including in their role as being involved with appropriations or tax policy, and them covering and providing critical coverage of pending or proposed or passed legislation is different than them themselves saying they intend to run for public office and as a result have certain policy aims. And as a part of those policy aims, they've crafted proposed pieces of legislation, including proposed pieces of legislation that were shared with other people in public office in order to get their feedback. It's not appropriate for those people to then take it and continue to aid and abet an across-the-aisle conspiracy to invisibilize that person while they collapse it into their own piece of legislation. It may be possible the specific piece of legislation of concern that I composed and presented to somebody else, and then they took and refactored into what they ended up in performance of their office, presenting as their bill a little later on. is somehow in their mind equivocable to the fact that a year and a half later, I'm presenting a legal argument that may or may not say something comparable to what they presented before they got elected to public office. But does that exclude the entire canon of their previous body of work and allow for it to be sold off or repackaged so somebody else can take it and use it as their own without ever acknowledging them? If you read an argument or a brief provided by Solicitor General Ted Cruz, and you cited something that he put before the court, would you have to acknowledge it came from Solicitor General of Texas, Ted Cruz? If you took information that was presented, including as part of a questionnaire determining policy issues, in the name of a publication during your election campaign, and then you used it to implement policy when you became Senator of the United States, would you be required to acknowledge that you had a past catalog of contributions to a publication? Okay. Would you be able to say that you took press releases that were written by a former newspaper editor who had then moved on to work in an opposition political campaign and used that as part of your budget priorities when you became President of the United States? Or would you have to say that when I was State Senator of Illinois, Barack Obama, I was involved in a process of providing answers to questionnaires, including one that was printed in Streetwise newspaper, and I knew at the time that there were staff members who later ended up working on political campaigns for opposition of people that I might have identified as a potential cabinet pick. See, that would be a part of an ethics disclosure in the case that somebody accused you of wrongdoing, wouldn't it? Yes, it would. And it would be the kind of thing that an astute reporter who had a responsible editor might want to take up and might want to actually put into the public realm. Materially altering the historical record up to and including if you're intending to draw on your past history of credibility as a member of the media, this is an altogether different consideration. And this is a crisis we're having now. Journalists, including editors and producers around the world, are murdered at an alarming rate in a manner that is demonstrably evident of a premeditated pattern that I personally can track going all the way back to the murder of Daniel Pearl in Pakistan. Why? You know. You had no right to agree to confidentialize it as some form of job security. That doesn't make you members of the media, doesn't make you members of the press. It makes you something else. You have a duty to speak about this. This isn't just about a First Amendment. This is about the 14th Amendment. This is about the 13th Amendment. This is about the 5th Amendment. This is about the Constitution overall. And if you can't stand up for yourself, then stand down.